Well, it is delightful to be here to honor Jim and the School Development Program. It's also delightful to be back here at Yale. I was a student here in the undergraduate years in the very first cohort of women at Yale, which was an interesting experience that we could talk about over a couple of glasses of wine at another time. And while I was here, I worked with the U.S. Grant Foundation, and there's somebody here. Who's here from the Grant Foundation? Yay! Which provides after-school and summer school programming for kids in New Haven. And that may be one of the reasons that I ended up as a school teacher. I think it is great that Yale has supported the Child Study Center and Dr. Comer's work. Someday, as Tim Shriver said last night in his speech over dinner, I hope it will actually directly support education professionals as well, and that's another conversation about the role of great universities in preparing teachers. This is a critical time, as Faye just said, and as Dr. Comer mentioned, in our country. We are at a moment in United States history where our nation is aggressively neglecting its children. 46 million children experience adverse conditions of poverty. 1 out of 4 children lives in poverty. More than half of public school children are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. Homelessness, which is increasing. There was an article in the New York Times this week that 1 out of 10 children in New York City does not have a permanent address and is sleeping in shelters or on somebody's couch each evening. Food insecurity, healthcare insecurity. Against all other developed nations, our infant mortality rates, our child health rates are near the very, very bottom. This is a moment where everyone who works with children is experiencing, and I know all of you in this room who work with children are experiencing also the adult stress and trauma of trying to meet all of the needs of children and having your heart opened up every day to the experiences that the children that you serve are having. And so it is more critical than ever before that we wrap around our children and our families in ways that allow productive and healthy development, and that we go out and vote in November for a different set of policies than the policies that we are experiencing today in this nation. All right, enough of that. Let's talk about the School Development Program. My mission in writing the book, and I have to recognize my co-author, Maddie, where are you? Please stand up, Madeline Gardner. Who works with me at the Learning Policy Institute, and we had a very short time to pull this together. Luckily, there was wonderful material available over 50 years, but Madeline came up here in the snow to try to collect data and did a wonderful job, and we're very grateful. Very grateful as well, of course, to Faye Brown, who made all of that possible. And there's some of you in the room who are featured in the book who were respondents. With those folks who we talked to and quoted in the book, please just stand up if you are here. These are folks who've been involved with the School Development Program over many years and who really helped us understand the tremendous impact that it has had. So we think about Jim Comer as somebody who has a lot of the answers that we need in education. But at the very beginning, as we think of the origin story of the school development, Jim had a lot of questions and not too many answers. And the book begins with his reflection on the first day of school at Baldwin Elementary School in New Haven, Connecticut, a year after the program began trying to work in the school. And he describes it as following. On the first day of school, I walked down the hall at Baldwin School. I was almost attacked by a teacher in trouble. She was anxious and wild-eyed. She grabbed my arm and said, help me, and literally pulled me into her classroom. What I saw was almost unbelievable. Children were yelling and screaming, milling around, hitting each other, calling each other names, and calling the teacher names. When the teacher called for order, she was ignored. When I called for order, I was ignored. That had never happened to me before. I really feel a lot of empathy for you, Jim. We headed for the hall, confused and in despair. Her classroom was not the only one in trouble. The school was chaotic and noisy. Teachers and administrators raced back and forth. Teachers could not find supplies. The first week was a short one, Thursday, September 5th, and Friday, September 6th. We left for the weekend shaken, with mixed feelings of impending doom and some vague hope that all would be better next week. My denial mechanisms were operating at top form. I suppose I just could not bear to admit the extent of the problem we had. All right, so there we have the beginning of what the school development program actually ultimately managed to accomplish. Dr. Comer was then a young child psychiatrist at the Yale Child Studies Center. He had just launched the school development program at Baldwin and King elementary schools. They were at that time the lowest achieving of New Haven's 31 public schools. More than 50% of the students in those schools were on government assistance. Students were chronically truant. Student behavior was disruptive, and morale among the staff was very, very low. A few years later, however, the picture was very different. The schools had become peaceful, purposeful, and happy environments for children and adults, welcoming to parents, supportive of staff. A later analysis found that between 1969 and 1984, the fourth grade students' grade equivalent scores increased from third grade level in reading and math to sixth grade level in reading and fifth grade level in math. They were the two highest performing schools in New Haven by 1984 and had near perfect attendance. So we know that major turnarounds in schools are possible. And although many rounds of school reform have come and gone in the 50 years since this work began, and those of you who are in my generation have been part of many of these cycles of reform, the school development program has withstood the test of time. It has quietly revolutionized the purpose and organization of some of the most troubled schools in the United States. It's empowered teachers and parents as decision makers. It has fostered the healthy development of students, and has produced outstanding results for schools and for the young people in them. Now, the school development program basically enacts the science of learning and development. It creates a whole child framework for reform. As Tim Shriver said last night in his remarks, the science of learning has caught up to Dr. Comer, who was way ahead. And I'm participating with Dr. Comer, Tim Shriver, Jackie Jodel, where's Jackie? There she is. In the Socialemotional and Academic Development Commission. Jackie directs the commission. Jim is honorary co-chair. Tim and I are also co-chairs on his coattails. And we've done a lot of synthesis. The scientists committee of that group has synthesized the body of knowledge about the science of learning and development. There's a lot of brain science now, neuroscience. We can see what lights up in the brain when different emotions and kinds of learning are going on. And we now know a great deal about how what the foundation of the program is really builds on that science. So I want to say a word about that very quickly. You can go to the website if you're interested of the Social-Emotional and Academic Development Commission, the SEED Commission, looking at how learning happens and a variety of the other publications there. But basically what we know from this research is that cognitive development and social-emotional development are tightly linked. It is not as though social-emotional development is a frill that we get to on the side if we have a moment of time while we're cramming, facts into kids' heads. That the two are completely interrelated. It also, we know a lot about how risks are heightened for children who experience adversity and trauma, which affects us biologically. It also affects brain architecture, it affects behavior, but is reversible and supportable through strong relationships. So I want to present just a few of the big takeaways from the science of learning and development syntheses that are coming out right now. The first is that development, the brain, and intelligence are malleable. That is, they grow over time. There is not such a thing as an IQ that is static and fixed when you are born. The brain is always growing, and fortunately for some of us who are more advanced in years, it continues to grow and develop all the way throughout life, not just when we are babies. And it develops as a function of both experiences, rich experiences, and relationships. And in fact, secure relationships actually affect the way in which neurons and pathways develop. And every time a mother, or a teacher hugs a child, that produces certain hormones, oxytocin and other hormones that actually affect the way the brain is developing as well as the way in which learning takes place. So we have to structure the experiences that people have so that those secure relationships and attachments and those rich environments are available to develop both the brain, the intelligence, and development. Human development, number 2, is variable, that we all have a different pace and profile of our development, and it has some predictable stages, but everyone begins at a different starting point. We all develop along the pathways in different ways, and that means that schools should avoid labeling children or designing learning experiences around some mythical average. When you try to fit all children into a sequence or a pacing guide, we miss the opportunity to nurture the individual potential of each child, to meet their developmental needs where they are, to help them progress. Those actions of labeling and saying, here's the norm and you're not on it, and so on, actually cause children and teachers to adopt counterproductive views about themselves and their own learning potential that undermine progress. And how children feel about themselves, whether they believe I'm good at math, or I'm bad at reading, or I am a student, or I am not a good student, actually has a huge predictive effect on their achievement. So that identity is as important as the actual fact of the learning that's going on. The third big takeaway from the science of of learning and development is that human relationships are the essential ingredient that catalyzes healthy learning and development. I mentioned that brain architecture is developed by the presence of warm, consistent, attuned relationships, positive experiences, and positive perceptions of those experiences. This actually affects the wiring of the brain. And when children have a stable relationship with at least one committed adult, but hopefully a whole set of committed adults who are working together in a common way to support their development, it can buffer even the most negative consequences of adversity. And so children benefit when they have those consistent empathetic relationships that are responsive to their needs. The fourth big takeaway is that adversity affects learning, and the way schools respond matters. Stress is a normal part of life, but excessive stress, toxic stress, which many people experience over and over again in the conditions that I described earlier, can really undermine children's well-being. But children also experience stress inside of school. It's not like all of that happens outside of school. If a child comes to school and they may have had a relative killed over the weekend, or been evicted from their home, or not had breakfast this morning, or their parents got divorced, or someone was incarcerated, you can go through the whole list of things that children experience every day. And if they put their head down on the desk, or if they fail to make eye contact, or if they are agitated and poke or push someone, if the response is punishment, rather than an inquiry as to what's going on, why are you feeling that way, how can we help you, then that toxic stress just increases. And the effects of that adversity can continue. Bias and stereotyping also produce toxic stress. And in our society, they produce that stress outside of school, but also in schools. So teachers' abilities to counteract stereotype threat, social identity threat, to say you are in this place seen, understood, supported, known to be competent, helped to become competent, all of those things also are necessary to counteract the adversity and stress that children will otherwise experience. The fifth big takeaway is that learning is social, emotional, and academic. Emotions affect learning very strongly. In fact, emotions, you cannot learn without emotion. And if you have positive emotions, if you feel trusting about that teacher, if you feel good about your classmates, if the task that you're being asked to undertake is exciting and motivating, those positive emotions help you learn more. But if you feel negatively, either because you're bringing in stress and a distraction from outside of class, or if you feel that you're being misperceived by the teacher, or if you feel threatened by a bully in the classroom, or if the work is just plain old boring because you're sitting there with that worksheet trying to do test prep over and over again, all of those things make learning less viable. And so negative emotions, anxiety, self-doubt, fear of failure, even boredom, are a negative effect on learning. So it's not that these things are a frill on the side. We have many, many studies that show that all of these factors actually produce achievement. A child's best performance occurs under conditions of high support and low threat. In addition, of course, children's abilities to manage their emotions influence their learning. If a child can calm himself, focus attention, that allows them to persist with hard tasks, pursue interests over a longer period of time, interpersonal skills, including the ability to work with peers and adults, resolve conflicts, work in teams. All of these things contribute to effective learning. We have a lot of evidence from meta-analyses of studies of social and emotional learning programs that they improve achievement by helping children with all of those intra and interpersonal skills. Students who have a growth mindset, who believe they can improve through effort, are less likely to become discouraged, and they will try harder when they run into difficulties. All those things are things that can be taught, and all of those things are things that the school development program helps children and adults figure out how to bring into the classroom. So it is important to provide the environment in which all of this set of skills can be addressed and developed. Dr. Comer once noted in an interview, in order to provide our children and youth with a more science of learning and development aligned education, What's needed most of all is a mindset that stops arguing that there are smart and dumb kids, good and bad kids. Schools should be created so that all of the people a child comes into contact with and the structures and procedures are designed to support them so they can be successful in any situation and so they can be successful in life. And what we want for children has to be true for adults, and that's one of the pieces of genius of the school development program, because it addresses the fact that if you want all of that for children, you have to provide all of that for adults. And this whole child approach, this supportive approach for children and an approach that helps adults also be supported in their development, has been really difficult to engage during this era of test-based accountability under No Child Left Behind. Thankfully, No Child Left Behind has been left behind. Because actually the same kind of labeling of children as good kids and bad kids and smart and dumb kids happen to schools. Labeled as good schools and bad schools, smart and dumb schools, and then punishments that were layered on. So this whole psychology, the punitive psychology, which is not developmental, and we have lots of evidence doesn't work. In fact, B.F. Skinner, who was the father of extrinsic motivation, rewards and punishments, way back in the 1950s, announced that punishment doesn't work. So, this is after he put his kids in a Skinner box, but we won't go down that path. But under the threat of public shamings and staff firings and school closures if scores did not climb every year, and we know that the goal of 100% proficient was never going to be met, so every school in America ultimately got labeled as a failing school before we had hit the end of that law, or they had all kinds of little widgets to avoid being labeled by buying into a variety of other backdoor strategies. But the drill and kill, test and punish, no excuses agenda caused many of the nation's most vulnerable children to experience this very narrowly defined scripted curriculum, a hostile, compliance-oriented climate that pushed many of them out of school. And it made it very, very difficult because adults were experiencing that kind of environment for adults to be able to provide the support for children. During that period of time in 2006, there was a study of 148,000 6th to 12th graders in which only 29% of the children in this country in secondary schools felt their school provided a caring, encouraging environment. So 71% of kids felt they did not experience a caring environment. Fewer than half of the students reported that they had the opportunity to learn social competencies such as empathy, decision-making, and conflict resolution skills. 30% of students reported engaging in multiple high-risk behaviors like substance abuse, violence, and attempted suicide. So that's where we have been, and we have a lot of work to continue to turn this around. And these approaches, of course, lead to school disengagement for a lot of young people. So Dr. Comer has always emphasized that if children are not doing well in school, or if they're behaving in ways that are counterproductive, adults must understand that the child is not trying to be bad, but is exhibiting a need for attention and for the kind of supports that will allow them to build a repertoire for problem solving. And that similarly, in schools that are underperforming, where there's a cycle of frustration that students and adults may have gotten involved in, that educators also need the same kinds of supports. So, how does the program do its work? Those of you who have been involved know this. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I will point out that the 6 developmental pathways, have to mention those: cognitive, social, psychological, physical, linguistic, and ethical, are the foundation for learning and development. Again, this tracks back to what we now know about brain development. By the way, we now know that physical activity actually produces stronger achievement. We know that learning languages and linguistic development produces stronger achievement. We know that getting adequate sleep and nutrition, all of these things produce stronger achievement. If you go to Finland, if you want to see schools in a whole country that are based on what we know about child development, in Finnish elementary schools, I was there with a congressional delegation. I was leading sort of a study with some people from Congress, and they asked one of their number ranked at the top of the rankings internationally, which was a big surprise when PISA assessments came out. So somebody said, well, to an elementary teacher, well, how is it that you have such, good outcomes in Finland? He said, well, first of all, you must have play, you must have music, you must have recess. Those are the things that we think of as frills. They send the kids outside every hour on the hour for 15 minutes. The little kids put their snowsuits on. The little baby children are like putting their gloves and boots and all of this on. They get regular fits. They have music. You cannot be an elementary teacher unless you can play the piano. I love that. And they learn multiple languages, so all the kids are trilingual. And all this stuff is actually building, neural pathways of brain development. So these developmental pathways are very important, and they're all very important, not just the cognitive. The other thing that's so key about the school development program is that it is grounded in 3 guiding principles for adult work. Collaboration, not so easy. Consensus, even harder, and no-fault problem solving. And I think this is really part of the genius. Jim and his colleagues understood that the way adults work together has to change if everybody's going to get on the same page for children. That means the way that schools operate has to change. And so over time, the program put in place mechanisms to allow for this. And I know that because I've dipped into the process over the years many times, people are always thinking about, well, how can we get this piece into the schools? How can we get that piece? So those of you who've participated know that there's a comprehensive school plan, which includes social and academic components. There is a lot of staff development, ideally. There is a process of assessment about what's working and what's not working and what we want to do next in a no-fault context. No blaming. Let's just figure out what to do. And that is the core, sort of a continuous improvement. Now, all of this is what we now are experiencing under the new federal law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, as like the new things, continuous improvement and problem solving and school plans, et cetera. But this, in fact, is what the development program has been doing all of these years. And as you know, there are mechanisms to bring adults together. So we have the school planning and management team, the parent team, the student and staff support team, and all of these teams have the opportunity to take responsibility for decision-making, for reflection, for ongoing data analysis, for course connection when necessary. People are involved, brought to the table, enabled to collaborate, and enabled to problem solve. So the school is viewed as a system whose purpose is to provide this supportive, warm, caring climate within relationships among adults, parents, and staff are also nurtured and valued. In this way, it perpetuates a way of being that changes behavior, and it supports adult development, and it supports children's development, and facilitates a deep and meaningful learning. In the course of doing this book, we got a chance to hear from some of the children themselves. So I just want to share with you some of the 4th and 5th grade students' comments from Davis Street Magnet School. Those in New Haven will know it. This is about the morning meeting, which is a key element for children. As the kids pointed out, this is Shamar, I think morning meeting is good because it helps kids with their problems. Like for me, it helps me a lot this year. I used to be getting into a lot of trouble, but then when I learned the Comer pathways, I kind of changed a little. Last year, I was getting into trouble and stuff, so now I don't. The pathways have helped me. The ones that have helped me are the cognitive, the language, and the social. I learn to think before I act. So Brianna put it this way: you get to interact with other people and tell them what you feel instead of bubbling up and keeping it inside, and then it hurts. But you get to let it out and nobody blames you or says, no, I didn't, or stuff like that. Instead, you get to tell them what's wrong and you get to work it out. Rachel put it this way: morning meeting means a lot to me because it helps me with my day. If I had a problem like yesterday afternoon, I can bring it to the class. I can go face to face with the person to tell him how I felt about the problem that we had. And it means a lot because it's taught me the ethical pathway. I love the way they name the pathways. How to talk to people so you don't hurt their feelings when you're asking them to do something or give them anything. And finally, Jamal, when I see people work out their problems, it really helps me, and I take what they've done and I work out my problems, and I do the same that they did. So you see kids modeling themselves on the problem solving of other kids, adults doing the same with what they see other adults doing. So this kind of work has been developed over many years in many, many schools, 1,000 schools in 26 states, and some other countries, several other countries as well. A strengths-based approach looks for the potential at every level, from the child to the adults and in the broader milieu. Although schools cannot replace the family, they recognize and draw out the positive health and social ingredients that are present in families. Another key piece is using data of all kinds, not just test score data, but data about children's behavior, about their circumstances, about what's going on in classrooms as part of a continual diagnostic process. The framework is built on several truths about human behavior. We all need community and support to develop. Behavior is a reaction to one's perceptions of the environment, and if we want to change our behavior, we have to understand those perceptions, attitudes, feelings, abilities about the environment. And as we watch and listen to children attentively, we're able to create responses to children that enable them to engage and to find pathways forward that are positive. So in the book, we provide a summary of research. And I'm not going to go through all that research. I'm just going to mention a little bit about it. We also have stories about the way the Comer Development Program was implemented in Paterson, New Jersey, particularly in the Norman Ware School, in New Haven as a district over many, many years, and some allusions to some of the work that went on in New York. Is Lester Young here? Lester was supposed to be one of the folks who was here, and he worked on this in New York. So I just will mention that there have been many, many studies. In 2003, there was a meta-analysis of 29 comprehensive school reform programs. It identified the school development program as one of only 3 models in the country that met criteria for the strongest evidence of effectiveness in reliably increasing student achievement. There have been studies of the program in Chicago, San Francisco, Cambridge, PG County, New Haven, New Jersey. Over many years and many studies, there's documentation of gains in student achievement, behavior, overall adjustment, compared to students who are matched in control schools, declines in suspension rates, absenteeism, and corporal punishment. A recent review that we did at the Learning Policy Institute of well-designed studies found strong improvements in attendance, achievement, and behavior, especially for low-income children in school development program schools. I'll give you just one example from the Weir School in New Jersey. It was a failing school, identified under No Child Left Behind as on the path to potential closing. This is a school that's an inclusion school, so it has a very high percentage of students with special education needs, well over 25%, mostly students of color in high poverty context. After a number of years of using the program by 2002, 2003, 96% of the fourth graders achieved full or advanced proficiency on the state language arts test, compared to 52% of their peers in the district. They outperformed students statewide, who were on average much more affluent than they. 96% achieved full or advanced proficiency on the math exam, more than twice as many as the district as a whole, and a third more than the state as a whole. By the following year, 100% of the fourth graders achieved full or advanced proficiency in both math and language arts. In a school questionnaire that was administered, the school faculty and staff reported the school climate as, quote, relaxed, very good, terrific, excellent, fantastic relationships where every student and parent is valued. One of the school level leaders there called her time at the elementary school the most joyous time. Another one called it an educational Camelot. One of the things that comes out in the research, though, is that the outcomes are much better in high-implementing schools. And Weir was one of those schools. There are many others that many of you have worked in. What were the features of high-implementing schools? These are schools that had more effective school teams, that were taking their role seriously, and where leaders were really emphasizing developing those school teams, and a thoughtful school improvement plan. So you've got to take that seriously and engage in it. Second thing is that all of the parties had a greater say in governance and could see their feelings and interests taken into account. So that collaboration and that participation. The third is that the needs of various cultural and racial groups were taken into account. So there was explicit attention to culturally competent, culturally responsive pedagogy and work. The team members were committed to improving the school. Very important knowledge of child development was used to develop programs and problem-solving strategies, so deep commitment to the staff development that produce the knowledge of child development and the development of parents. Custodians, I love the fact that in SDP schools, custodians, monitors on the playground, hall monitors, the parents, the secretary, everybody is thinking about child development. This is so important. So you think about the experience that kids have in school, and how often adults have not had this opportunity to learn how to be good problem solvers, good conflict resolvers, interpersonally skilled. And so kids experience adults who say, get out of here, don't bother me, move, stand in the corner, whatever it might be. So until you get all the adults really working from a child development perspective, it's very hard for kids to have the experiences that they need. And finally, consensus used throughout the school. So what is needed to support strong implementation? I'm going to close my remarks with the recommendations that we have for how can this kind of work be used in every school, in every district, at a high level of implementation. That would require changes in policy as well as changes in practices. So I'm going to point out a few of the key things that we learned in the course of the study. First, and I know Jim talks about this all the time and we talk about it together, prepare teachers for developmentally grounded education. And that seems straightforward, but we do not have in this country adequate, strong investments in teacher preparation for all teachers. In fact, a third of teachers are coming in right now without being fully prepared. They have not undergone a full preparation program when they begin teaching. And then those who have may or may not have encountered the kind of deep understanding of child development that is needed. There are entire states that got rid of child development knowledge base during eras of reform when they thought that teaching was just about knowing the content, not about knowing the child. We've had a pendulum swing of different theories about preparation. For developmentally grounded education to become routine, we need to have every teacher prepared to enter the classroom before they get there. That means that we need to know that, as in some other countries, anyone who teaches should have their preparation fully paid for, so that we don't have to get, so that teachers don't have to say, I can only afford to get this much preparation because I just don't have the money, to step out of the workforce and so on. This is true in Finland and in Singapore and lots of other countries. And then they should go to high-quality preparation institutions where child development is at the core. Child development and learning. I used to say learning and development, but Dr. Comer got me to say development and learning in the right order. Right here in New Haven, Southern Connecticut State University. Who's here from Southern Con? All right, woo! Is very, very actively trying to strengthen its capacity to do this work. It's working very closely with the development program. One of the things I loved as we were talking to faculty is that they took the child development courses out of the psychology department and brought them into the education school, which we did at Stanford also, and which my colleagues at Bank Street and Teachers College and a lot of other places have done. Because teachers were reading a textbook that said, and here's this theory, and here's that theory, and here's this other, but none of it was applied to what would you do in the classroom. So, as one of the professors said, our discipline is organized in the worst possible way. He was talking about psychology. We organize our discipline in terms of schools of thought instead of applications to student development and teaching. So they've reorganized courses, including that, put child studies at the center of that work, as many other good programs have. I teach adolescent development at Stanford, and that's the way we teach our work. And I have to say, we have our students follow, our students who are becoming teachers follow students in their schools. They shadow the students in the high school. They interview them. They go visit with the parents, often at home. They look at this child's development from every angle, and it is a powerful experience that lasts with them throughout their entire teaching career. At Southern Con, in addition to reorganizing the programs, they're bringing social work students together with teachers, so that in the internships that happen in the schools, we're beginning to get a whole child perspective. So I want to simply recognize that effort and the efforts of other programs, but we're going to need changes in accreditation practices. We're going to need changes in licensing practices. We're going to need changes in the funding practices for both candidates and schools of education if we're going to get to the place where child development is at the core in programs that are designed to help all staff do this work. Leader preparation is equally important. School principals and other administrators must understand child development. And there are lots of parts of what happens in the school that are not in the classroom. There's the way in which discipline is organized. There's the way in which schools welcome or don't welcome parents. There's the way in which teachers are enabled to go do home visits or not. The ways in which back to school or parent meetings are organized when parents can actually attend and when they can be part of it rather than the practices that we've gotten used to, which are often very off-putting for parents. The other thing to remember is that many parents had bad experiences in school. So they've got PTSD, right? And so if you want parent participation in schools, as I've learned in schools that I've helped to develop, you need to really be proactive in both going to parents and engaging them as experts who know a lot about their child, and then build that partnership rather than creating the kind of environment where it's it's sort of like talk to the hand, and where that PTSD is activated when parents come in the building because they're not getting the kind of welcoming that they need. Second thing is we need strong in-service professional development. It has to be continuous. It cannot be drive-by, spray and pray workshops after school. At the Learning Policy Institute, we did a study, actually Maddie Gardner was part of that study, where we looked at what kind of professional development actually has produced evidence of changes in teacher practice and changes in student learning. And there were 7 features of those kinds of professional development experiences that really replicate what we see in the school development program where it works. The professional development is focused on what teachers are teaching. It incorporates active learning for the professionals. It supports collaboration in job-embedded contexts. It uses modeling of effective practices. It includes coaching and expert support. It offers opportunity for feedback and reflection. It's of sustained duration over a long period of time, so this becomes habitual and not just an event. The third thing, of course, is parent involvement, and that, as I said, has to really include proactive outreach, and then opportunities for parents to learn about child development. The kind of training that staff are getting, parents should get too. I've seen places, and I know SDP schools have sometimes done this, where parents and staff are getting the same training at the same time. The fourth area is school redesign. Our schools were designed based on the factory model that was common in the early 1900s. Our kids go to different adults every year in the Prussian age grading system that we adopted in about 1905. And they go to different teachers every 45 minutes in a middle school and in a high school. Our kids in this country see about twice as many teachers as kids in many other countries do, where it's more common that teachers will loop with the same children for 2 or 3 or 4 years. How many of you have had the opportunity to loop with? That's wonderful. And you know that it creates a very different basis for relationships. You have greater knowledge, you lose less time. Also, advisory systems in secondary schools where there's an advisor who knows a few, 15, 20 kids well over 2, 3, 4 years of school, is connected to the families, is able to use that advisory period to teach conflict resolution and social emotional skills. We have to have school designs, and many of the SDP schools did this and talked about how changing their systems and structures to allow for looping, to allow for these kinds of advisory systems, really enabled them to do the work of relationship building and developmental support. The fifth issue is creating multi-tiered systems of support. Many schools are now working on an MTSS framework. I would point out, and in fact, Dr. Comer with Ed Ziegler created at a moment in time the COSI project, which brought child care and family support services together with elementary schools, full day care for preschool-aged children all the way through wraparound services, very strong outcomes from those models. We need that in every context. Health, mental health, and social services, as well as early childhood education. We also need ways by which kids who have needs, whether it's because of an academic need or whether it's because of a trauma or adverse circumstance, can immediately get help without labeling, without stigma, without a 1.5 year long delay to get an IEP process going, et cetera, et cetera. We have a very bureaucratized way of accessing supports for kids, and we need to clear away those impediments and just help kids get help when they need it. In Finland, The teachers are all prepared for special education. They have a 2-year master's degree structure, and about 50% of the kids get some kind of special supports in elementary school. But by high school, almost nobody needs it. They get what they need when they need it for as long as they need it, and then they're caught up and they are supported and they go on, and we need to develop those kinds of systems. The 6th issue is transforming our approaches to discipline from punishment to restorative practices, so that, in fact, kids are enabled to become part of and stay a part of the community. And then the last thing is, as you know, to overhaul our accountability systems so that they really are about continuous improvement. They're about the data on school climate and student treatment and supports, rather than about who's going to get punished when and by whom throughout the system. In the final analysis, a developmentally supportive approach to education benefits not only the students, who are more humanely and productively taught and parented and who achieve at higher levels, but also the society as a whole, because support for students translates into their ability to contribute to their families and communities. And we need every child today to come out contributing to the, get a good job, pay good taxes, pay for my health care and your Social Security benefits. So there is self-interest, but as well as the interest of the child. John Dewey, who plagiarized everything I thought before I thought it, put it this way, and I think Dr. Comer lives with this idea as well. What the best and wisest parent wants for his or her child, that must the community want for all of its children. You can say it with me. Any other goal is narrow and unlovely. Acted upon, it destroys our democracy. Only by being true to the full growth of all the individuals who make it up can society by any chance be true to itself. I want to thank you for all of the work that you have done to make this ideal real in your schools, universities, and in our country, and of course, to Dr. Comer for inspiring us all.